The woman who smiled while her soul was breaking broken heart. She smiled, even when her heart was falling apart, even when her world was burning quietly behind her eyes. No one saw it. The cracks hidden beneath her calm face, the tremble in her hands she hid behind laughter. She smiled, not because she was happy, but because she refused to let pain win. Her smile was not decoration. It was armor. It was the last thing she owned, that the world couldn't take away. Every day she woke up, put her broken pieces back together, and faced the world as if nothing had happened. She brushed her hair, fixed her scarf, and whispered to the mirror, "You are fine." But her reflection knew the truth. She wasn't fine. She was fighting battles no one could see. Yet still, she smiled, because she believed if she stopped smiling, the people she loved would start crying. She carried pain like royalty, with quiet grace, with elegance that even sorrow couldn't ruin. Her eyes held storms, but her lips spoke peace. People called her strong, but strength was never her choice. It was her destiny. Every night, she'd lie awake, thinking of the things she couldn't say aloud, the betrayals, the losses, the loneliness. And yet, when morning came, she rose with dignity, her silence glowing brighter than the sun. No one knew how many times she broke in one day. No one saw the tears that never fell, because she had learned to cry inwardly, to let the pain dissolve quietly, where no one could pity her. She told herself, "Some wounds are not meant for the world. They belong to me and my God alone." And that belief kept her standing, when even her soul wanted to collapse. Her smile wasn't fake. It was sacred. It was a prayer dressed as a gesture. It said to the universe, "You can wound me, but you will not define me." And in that moment, she became something extraordinary. A woman who learned to turn her pain into light. There were nights she didn't sleep, not because she wasn't tired, but because her mind wouldn't stop whispering the stories her heart wanted to forget. Memories came like ghosts, the faces of those who left, the echoes of promises that never came true, and the sound of her own laughter before life taught her silence. She would sit by the window, watching the moonlight spill across her hands, and whisper softly, "Maybe this is how strength feels. Lonely, quiet, invisible." People saw her and said, "She's so calm, so peaceful." They didn't know peace wasn't what she felt. It was what she performed. Behind her calmness was a battlefield of emotions. She'd mastered the art of holding pain gently, as if it were a fragile child. She never screamed. She never cursed, because deep down she believed dignity was her last language. Sometimes, she remembered the girl she used to be, the one who laughed easily, who dreamed without fear, who believed everyone meant well. She missed that girl. But she also knew that girl had to die for this woman to be born. The woman who smiled while her soul was breaking wasn't naive anymore. She was wiser, softer, quieter, and somehow stronger than before. One evening, someone asked her, "How do you stay so strong?" She smiled and replied, "I stopped expecting the world to understand my wounds." They thought it was confidence, but it was actually surrender. Not the kind that gives up, the kind that trusts destiny. She had learned to live like the ocean, calm on the surface, but deep enough to drown her own pain. Her smile became her signature. It appeared at weddings, at funerals, at goodbyes. The same soft curve of lips that said everything and nothing at once. But her eyes, if you looked closely, you'd see stories inside them. Stories of loss, of sacrifice, of nights when she prayed so long that her tears dried before her hope did. Her silence was no longer weakness. It was worship. It was her conversation with God. People called her resilient. They didn't know resilience is born when you have no choice but to survive. They didn't know how heavy it is to wear strength like a crown when your heart is bleeding beneath it. But she carried it beautifully, like a queen who didn't need a throne, only her own truth. And slowly, something magical began to happen. Her pain transformed, not into joy, but into light. She started noticing small beauties again. The sound of birds in the morning, the smell of rain on dry soil, the laughter of a child passing by. Her soul was still cracked, but light began to leak through those cracks. She realized, maybe healing isn't about being unbroken. Maybe it's about learning to shine through what's shattered. So she smiled again, not to hide this time, but to honor all the battles she'd survived. Her smile was no longer armor. It was proof that she had met the storm and still chosen grace. Days passed, and the world kept moving. People laughing, crying, chasing dreams. But she moved differently. Slowly, deliberately, as if every step she took was a prayer. She no longer searched for people to understand her. She stopped explaining her silence, stopped defending her softness. She had realized that peace doesn't come from being understood. It comes from understanding yourself. One morning, as she poured tea into an old cracked cup, she smiled. The crack reminded her of herself. Flawed, but still capable of holding warmth. She whispered, "I am still useful, even broken." And in that whisper, there was something sacred. A kind of forgiveness. Forgiveness for the girl who trusted too easily. For the woman who stayed too long. For the soul that forgot to rest. People around her noticed something new. A calm that wasn't forced. She spoke less, but when she did, her words carried weight, like someone who had walked through storms and learned the language of rain. Her silence began to heal others. When friends came to her crying, she didn't rush to fix them. She simply listened, offering the same stillness that once saved her. They'd leave her home saying, "I don't know why, but I feel lighter." She'd smile softly, knowing that sometimes peace is contagious. One night, she looked at the stars and remembered the days she used to cry to the same sky, begging for answers. Now she just said, "Thank you." She didn't need the answers anymore, because the pain had already taught her everything she needed to know. She learned that sometimes God breaks your heart to rebuild your faith. In the mirror, she saw lines near her eyes, not from age, but from strength. Each line was a story, each shadow a memory. And when she smiled this time, it wasn't to hide the breaking, it was to celebrate the surviving. She had turned her pain into prayer, her loneliness into wisdom, her heartbreak into poetry. She learned that love doesn't always stay, but it always leaves lessons. That sometimes, the person who hurts you the most is the one who teaches you who you really are. She no longer hated them. She simply whispered, "Thank you for teaching me how to return to myself." Years later, someone asked her, "Are you happy now?" She paused. Happiness felt too small a word. "I am at peace," she said. And peace is rarer than happiness, because happiness depends on moments, but peace depends on surrender. And she had finally surrendered to life, to pain, to love, to herself. When people saw her smile now, they still said, "She's so strong," but they never knew how much softness it took to be that strong. Her smile wasn't just a gesture anymore. It was her crown, her prayer, her victory. She had walked through fire and still smelled like roses. Years went by, and the world still called her the quiet one. But now her quietness carried grace. People began to come to her, not to offer comfort, but to receive it. She had become a light, without ever meaning to. The same woman who once broke in silence was now the reason others learned to heal. When young girls cried to her about heartbreak, she didn't tell them to forget. She told them, "Feel it. Let it hurt. But don't let it make you bitter." They'd look at her, wondering how she could speak of pain with such beauty. She'd smile and say, "Because pain is not the enemy. It is the teacher that no one wants, but everyone needs." Her home became a small sanctuary. Candles, old books, a faint scent of roses in every corner. People said it felt holy, like love had lived there long enough to become air. She'd sit with strangers, listen to their stories, and somewhere between tears and tea, they'd begin to heal. They didn't know how, but she did, because she had once been them. One evening, a man who had once broken her heart came to visit. He looked older, tired, full of regret. He said softly, "You never hated me." She smiled, the same gentle smile that used to hide her pain. But this time it wasn't hiding anything. "No," she said, "I didn't hate you. I just finally loved myself enough to let you go." He lowered his head, tears falling like rain that came too late. And she whispered, "It's okay. Some goodbyes are blessings in disguise." That night she prayed, not for love, not for wealth, but for strength to keep giving light, even when no one noticed. She prayed that her story would reach others who were breaking silently, that they'd know they are not alone. Her tears had once been her weakness. Now they were her wisdom. Her silence had once been her prison. Now it was her power. The world never saw her pain, but the heavens did. And so they turned her wounds into wings. She had learned to fly, without ever leaving the ground. When people asked her, "What kept you alive through all that pain?" she would smile, touch her heart, and say, "Hope," because even in her darkest nights, she never stopped believing that light would return. And it did, slowly, softly, through her own soul. Years later, when she grew old, children played around her feet. They didn't know her story, but they loved her laughter. And when she smiled, the whole room felt lighter, as if heaven itself leaned closer to listen. Because the woman who once broke quietly had become a legend of grace. She didn't need the world's applause. She already had peace. And when the sun set on her final day, her last whisper was a prayer. "Dear God, if someone out there is breaking tonight, send them the same light you once sent to me." Sparkle, she smiled till the end. Not because life was easy, but because her soul had learned to turn every heartbreak into a hymn. And when her story was finally reaching its end, the skies seemed quieter that day. The wind whispered through her window, as if even nature knew a soul of rare beauty was about to return home. She sat by the window, the same place she had once cried 1,000 silent tears. Now her eyes were calm, reflecting peace instead of pain. Her heart beat slower, but it was full of memories, forgiveness, and light. She looked at an old photograph, a faded picture of her younger self. The same eyes, but the fire in them had softened into wisdom. She smiled and whispered, "You made it, my dear. You walked through fire and never lost your grace." Her voice trembled, not from fear, but from gratitude. Once she had begged God for strength. Now she thanked Him for the storms, because without them, she never would have found her wings. Every heartbreak, every lonely night, every unanswered prayer, they had shaped her into something eternal. Her pain had become her purpose. Her silence had become her song. And her story was no longer about sadness, but about victory. As the evening light faded, she closed her eyes and saw faces. Those she had loved, those she had lost, and those she had forgiven. Her heart spoke to them in silence. I forgive you. Not because you were sorry, but because I wanted peace. And with that forgiveness, a warmth filled the room, as if heaven itself had sent angels to welcome her home. A single tear rolled down her cheek, not of sorrow, but of release. She had carried her pain like royalty, and now she was free. No more pretending, no more breaking in silence. Only truth, only love. She took one last breath, and whispered softly, Ya Allah, thank you for never leaving me, even when I thought I was alone. The next morning, people found her still smiling. Her face was peaceful, her hands resting gently over her heart, as if she had fallen asleep in God's arms. They cried, because the world had lost a gentle soul. But heaven rejoiced. Years later, when people spoke of her, they didn't talk about her pain. They spoke of her smile, the woman who smiled while her soul was breaking, the woman who taught the world that silence could be sacred, that strength could be soft, and that love, real love, never leaves, even when hearts do. Her story became a legend whispered in families, told by mothers to daughters, as a reminder that even in the darkest nights, there is a light waiting to rise from within. She had not lived a perfect life, but she had lived a meaningful one. And every time someone smiled, through their pain, somewhere in the unseen, her soul smiled back. Epilogue. She became a star, not the kind that shines in the sky, but the kind that lives in hearts, guiding lost souls home through the darkness she once knew so well. She was gone from the world, but her light stayed behind, whispering softly to those who still break in silence, don't hide your scars. They are the places where God's light enter. You,